Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Ben. Welcome to the Swanky Cat channel, where I don't actually ride motorcycles anymore. I just shop for them online. So if you guys have not been following along, I've been riding KLRs for the last 8 years now. I'm on my second one. That's the orange Gen 2 that you're watching right now. And I've done a little bit of everything on this bike. I've cruised on the highway at 70 miles an hour for long periods of time. I've ran gravel roads like this, and I've also done, well, a few things that I think are probably outside of the design parameters for the old KLR 650. And today I've decided that I'm going to start looking at something maybe a little bit more purpose-built for the type of adventure riding that I like to do. And honestly, a lot of the reason that I'm looking at the bike that I'm going to look at today is because of the adventure that you're watching part of right now. My dad and I took his Super Sherpa 250 and my TW 200 on kind of an epic adventure through a southern part of the state that had a lot of sandy, sort of wet trails, along with a bunch of single track like this. And with the TW all loaded down with gear, to be honest, I really enjoyed every part of it, even the road. Obviously, this isn't a bike that's meant for super long stints on the highway, but I'm thinking maybe there's some sort of middle ground in between a TW 200 and a KLR 650 that is really where I should be sort of investigating and trying to see, you know, just how disappointing or how awesome it is compared to a giant bike like the KLR 650. So let's take a look at the somewhat redesigned 2024 KLX 300. So according to the overview here, the KLX 300 is a highly versatile, lightweight dual sport motorcycle that keeps going when the road ends, which if you guys have watched any of my other videos or even just from the beginning bits here, you can tell that that is definitely what I'm into. So that certainly sounds good. However, I am a little bit nervous about this adventuring on the paved streets. Obviously, this bike is meant to be on the road. It's legally allowed to be. It's got a headlight, it's got a taillight, it's got blinkers. It should be ready for the road. But the thing is, I've ridden 250 dual sports on the highway, and I've ridden my KLR 650 on the highway, and I can tell you that those are very different machines to ride, partially because of all the wind protection that the KLR gives you and the complete lack of wind protection that this is going to provide. The other thing is the weight that maybe isn't so favorable off-road for the KLR is definitely sort of part of what makes the bike feel so nice, so solid, and so planted out on the highway, where a light bike like this, as much as the wheel size and the geometry of the bike make it feel really, really good off-road, on-road, I guess before I pass any judgment on this bike, of course we should ride it and we should look at a few more specs. Even though they call this a 300, it is a 292cc single-cylinder liquid-cooled 4-stroke engine with electric start. Actually, the first dual sport I ever rode was my wife's KLR 250, and that did not have electric start, and that was a pain in the butt. Oh, it looks like we've got new styling, new shrouds, side covers, and fenders. And a new LED headlight and tail light, which is not LED, which is silly. I don't know why they're doing that still. MSRP, $6,199 to $6,399? I don't know where the ads are, but I guess we'll figure that out. So we've got dual sport tuned long travel suspension, all digital multifunction instrumentation. Pretty sure they didn't actually change that gauge cluster, and honestly, that's like the worst part of this bike, but hopefully we can get a peek at that later. A lightweight frame, and then something we're actually interested in here. So full-size 21-inch front, which is what you'd expect on a dual sport and some of the more off-road oriented adventure bikes. This 18-inch rear wheel, though, is actually something that I'm a bit surprised to see. Most sort of, I don't know, kind of putt-around dual sports will have a 17-inch wheel in the rear. But when you're looking more at like motocross bikes and some of the more enduro-leaning dual sport bikes, you definitely start to see this 18-inch rear wheel, so that's a good thing. Disc brakes, you'd certainly hope not to see anything else in 2024. Heat management for rider comfort had me a little bit confused at first. We'll read into that a little bit more later. We'll take a look at the specs and details in just a bit, but let's see what they've got here for features. So this is a lot of marketing stuff, but one thing that I did want to point out, for added comfort, especially in heavy traffic or slow-moving hot trails off-road, the innovative radiator fan directs hot air down and away from the rider, improving rider comfort. I'm not sure exactly where they've got that fan. Usually it's just behind the radiator. I don't know if they just have like a shroud that sort of points it down, I guess. I mean, I guess innovative is maybe a strong word, but I suppose it is the right word, and definitely kind of a good idea and something that I'm happy to see. So in the dual sport capability section here, I want to point a couple things out. So we've got a 26.7 degree caster angle or rake angle or whatever you want to call it. And essentially what that is if you draw a line straight down through the steering here, the caster angle is the angle that the fork is sort of stuck out at from that vertical axis. And if we take a look at my KLR 650 cheat sheet here, the Gen 3 version is going to have a 30-degree rake. So this is actually brought in a little bit from there. I mean, I guess not a whole lot. I would be interested to see how that reacts. I guess maybe being a lighter bike, having the wheel tucked in a little bit closer won't be a big deal. But in general, bikes with a little bit more rake and the tire stuck out a little bit far in front of it is a little bit easier to float through stuff like sand, snow, mud, that sort of thing. And they're claiming here that the short wheelbase contributes to the quick handling. And that can be a good thing when you need quick handling, but like I said before, when you're out on the highway, you don't really want that quick handling. Now, this long travel trail tuned suspension does have some pretty impressive numbers behind it. We've got 10 inches of travel up front, and we've got 9.1 inches in the rear. And if we take a look at the KLR numbers for that, this definitely looks a heck of a lot more impressive. 7.9 inches of travel in the front of the KLR and 8 in the rear. So that means that we've got another 1.1 inches in the rear and a whole nother 2.1 inches in the front. That's a lot more suspension travel, especially on what I believe should be a much, much lighter bike. And we do have 43mm inverted cartridge-style forks in the front that do have adjustable compression damping. Would be nice to see a preload adjustment up there, but I guess compression damping will have to do. The Unitrack rear suspension, whoa. The Unitrack rear suspension offers bump absorption? Isn't that what they all do? The rear also has compression and rebound damping adjustability with the fully adjustable preload. So that's definitely a good thing to see. You certainly want to be able to move the rear around, especially if you're going to be piling gear on this thing like I plan to do. They sure do seem to be talking about this bike like it is meant for me here. Thick padded seat that provides comfort on longer rides. Comfort might be a relative term, but I guess at least it seems like they understand that that is something that we want, and whether or not they would have actually given that to us, I mean, is of course something that we'll have to test out. This statement right here, though, sort of makes me question their credibility. The 35.2-inch seat height allows riders to comfortably reach the ground at stops for added confidence. Now, I guess if you have a 35 or 36-inch inseam, I could see where a 35.2-inch seat height would inspire confidence at stops. But for somebody with a 31-inch inseam that only weighs 160 pounds, unless that suspension has some real sag to it, 35 inches is quite a ways off the ground. The S model of the Gen 3 puts you at 32.1 inches above the ground, where the standard model that I have has a 34.3-inch seat height, and that isn't bad, but I certainly don't want to be another inch higher. I guess since the bike is hopefully much lighter, maybe it won't be a big deal, but 35.2 inches is not really all that beginner friendly. The aggressive looks, though, I've got to say, I would definitely agree with. This is, I mean, just one of the coolest dual sport motorcycles that I've seen, and I've got a 701 in the garage. The headlight on here could be a little bit different, a little more aggressive looking. I would have really liked to seen something that just came stock with a rally fairing. I mean, I don't think anybody is going to be disappointed to have something like that, and I honestly don't know why they're not doing that on these bikes. I mean, I would think that the market has got to go there eventually. Make it something you can pull off easily. Make it something that you can stick a GPS behind. I mean, who's going to buy one of these things that's a serious rider and not want that sort of stuff anyway? Honestly, that's the biggest reason that I've gone away from these light dual sports and went to a bike like the KLR. That's actually the reason that I never bought an XR or a DR. Wind protection is important for adventure riding, and there's just no way around that. All right, so I think we've got to the end of all the marketing jargon here. Let's take a deeper dive into the specs and see just exactly what they've got for us here. And I think maybe before we get into that, I suppose it's worth mentioning that this bike was redesigned from the 2023 model, which it definitely needed an update. I remember back when they came out with this right alongside the sort of beautifully redesigned CRF 300, I was just, I don't know, a little bit taken aback by the fact that they redesigned it, but didn't really make it look any better or any newer than it did before. I mean, it's a little bit better, but it's not much. The thing is, though, a lot of these specs are going to look pretty darn familiar once we get into the 2024 model. I've compared these, and honestly, unless I missed something, I don't think there's actually anything that's any different in this section. This bike was definitely improvement over the previous year models, and I think maybe this wouldn't be a bad option if you could find an older one. But boy, I sure don't want one, because this new one definitely looks cool. So let's see what they've got for us here. So here's that all-digital instrumentation that they keep talking about, and if I am correct, yeah, it's just this absolutely horrid goggle-looking piece of garbage. I just don't know why they do that. These silly little light-up indicators, and look at these bars. These bars have more sweep than all three of the brooms that I have in the basement. This is just garbage. I don't know why they do that. The Tenere 700, the bar was so straight, it was like hanging on to one of my broom handles. And then the KLR and this, it's like riding a beach cruiser. Who wants to ride around off-road or even on-road like this? I don't know. We'll switch those out later. I suppose we can go through some colors here. So the beautiful lime green, I don't know if I'll be able to get a hold of if I do decide on one of these. But there is one of these gray ones that, to be honest, might not look half bad with sort of a crazy, like, gray and white wrap on it. Anyway, then we've also got the camo, which I've just never been a fan of. Now, I did notice that there's a bit of a weird thing back here. I don't know if this is an antifreeze reservoir. It's way too big for brake fluid. This isn't an oil-injected two-stroke, so I guess that's what it is. It's honestly kind of a silly spot for it, though. Nice little pea shooter exhaust that we'd, of course, have to switch out, and apparently no bash plate. I don't know if they just hope that this is going to be enough protection. I guess maybe it would be. Other than that, definitely a really neat looking bike. Cool looking headlight. Like I said, a little bit more wind protection would be great. Taillight. Actually, I think that's the KLR taillight, isn't it? Yeah, it's the KLR taillight and the signal lights. And this big floppy thing would probably have to come off. I don't know. I left the one on my KLR. Definitely a neat looking bike, though, and not something that I would be too disappointed to have sitting in the garage. Really looks a lot more like a dirt bike, which I never really understood why dual sports never looked like dirt bikes. I mean, dirt bikes are like one of the coolest looking motorcycles out there, so why not make something like this at least look like it's a dirt bike? I don't know. All right, on to the specs here. So 4-stroke dual overhead cam, liquid cooled, like we mentioned, 292 cc's, bore and stroke, if you're interested. Compression ratio, so the last bike that I looked at was the Pan America, and that had like a 13-to-1 compression ratio. 11.1-to-1 is reduced from that a bit, and a high compression ratio like 13-to-1 is great if you want to squeeze a lot of power out of a motor. I did hear from somebody in the comments that they and two other owners of Pan Americas with that 150 horsepower V-twin engine in it and the 13-to-1 compression ratio, they didn't last very long. Let's say that. In general, it's actually better to have a lower compression ratio if you're looking at a dual sport or especially an adventure bike, something that's going to be out on the highway a lot. So 11-to-1, even though I'm not an expert on this, I think that's probably kind of the area that you want to be. It's going to give you hopefully enough power to have fun, but not so much power that you're having to rebuild an engine every couple hundred hours like you would on a dirt bike. As per usual, the Kawasaki website doesn't say anything about horsepower, so we'll take a look on Google here. So as usual online, you see a couple different numbers. I believe this 29 or 30-ish horsepower is going to be what the motor makes, and then you'll see some lower numbers here. So 26 there, 24 here. I think that's going to be actual dyno data, and then 15.6 foot-pounds of torque. Somehow, though, it's not any more horsepower than my dad's 2002 Super Sherpa. But I suppose horsepower doesn't mean everything. We do, of course, have fuel injection with a 34mm throttle body, CDI ignition, and a 6th gear. I've searched for a 6th gear on both of my KLR 650s at least 1,000 times each, I think, and never came across it. So it'll definitely be nice to have a bike with a 6th gear on it. Wet multi-disc clutch, pretty much par for the course, and final drive is chain, of course. That's what we want for off-road. So here we go again with the 43mm inverted fork cartridge, the 10 inches of suspension travel up front, the Unitrack gas charge shock with piggyback reservoir and adjustable compression rebound damping, and spring preload. And there's our 9.1 inches of travel again, 21-inch front, 18-inch rear. Up front for brakes, we've got a 250mm rotor with a dual piston caliper, and that is just going to be on the left side here. That's what the KLR is as well. And then on the back, we've got 240mm rotor with a single piston caliper. Other details, tubular semi-double cradle frame, which I believe actually that may or may not be an email about the bike that we're looking at today. I believe this frame callout is actually different than the other model. Yeah, semi-double cradle. So what is so different about it? Tubular part, I suppose, huh? Tubular, bro. It looks like the same frame, though, man. I don't know where the tubes are. Yeah, I don't see any tubes. I think they just changed the word. Yeah, this isn't any different. What are they trying to pull? All right, so here's our 26.7 degree rake, 4.2 trail. So if we redraw that imaginary vertical line here, the distance between that vertical line and the center of the front wheel is that trail number. And like I said before, the higher those numbers are, the better it's gonna feel off-road because it'll feel lighter, but on the road, it'll also feel like it kind of wants to fall over and not be as stable at high speed, where the opposite direction, like a sport bike, the front wheel is tucked way in, so you have a really low rake number and a low trail number, and those are not fun to ride at slow speeds, but feel much more stable at high speeds. All right, let's see, what else are we interested in here? So ground clearance of 10.8 inches. That is definitely better than the KLR. I don't remember that offhand exactly, but yeah, that is much, much, much better. This is definitely an off-road dual sport. That is awesome. 10 inches is a lot. Now, I did already mention the seat height a bit here. Obviously, especially the S model, we're going to be towering over the standard model. An inch is going to be pretty noticeably different, especially for somebody with a 31-inch inseam like I've got. That's going to make it a little bit harder to get to the ground. However, I've got to say, I think that maybe the weight difference will sort of make that negligible and not really something that's even a concern. The weight and seat height of my bike did become a lot more manageable once I sort of figured out how to ride a big bike off-road. So I think a 302-pound dual sport with a 35.2-inch seat height probably won't be too hard to figure out. Although actually, now that I think about it, I think this is 50 pounds lighter than my 701 and 20 or 30 pounds lighter than the TW. So not bad. We do only have a 2-gallon tank, and I mean, even if this gets 50 miles of the gallon, that's still only 100 miles, and that's not really great. I would assume that this maybe gets closer to like 60, so then you're pushing maybe 120 miles to the tank, but the KLR is not only double this, it's actually triple. 6.1 gallon versus 2. So this definitely is going to make this a little bit more of a dual sport than it is an adventure bike, but of course you can always add a little bit of fuel if you need to, either through an auxiliary tank or just a larger tank when hopefully somebody comes out with one if the previous year model didn't already fit, which it might. 56.7 inch wheelbase. Let's compare the KLR's wheelbase here. So the KLR is 60.6 inches. Oh, wow. So that's really not that much different. 2.3 inches? I mean, I guess 2.3 inches is a little bit longer, but yeah, this is not going to be a terribly small bike. All right, anything else interesting? We've got our color options there, 12-month warranty. Of course, you can extend it. What color is your favorite? What would you go with? I really like the green. I'd much rather have that. Gray's not the worst, though. Speaking of that, though, I'll go over on my other screen here and see what they said. I can check and see if I have one coming in the near future. Probably not for another month or two, though. Out the door price, $6,529.85. Is it worth waiting a month? Could go pick this one up today. What did this have on it for tires? I bet one of you guys know. I feel like I've seen them before, but they actually look like almost decently aggressive enough that maybe I'd run them for a little while. So we did have a decent range here in the MSRP. I guess let's do a build and price and see what my dream KLX 300 would come out to. Choose a model. That's apparently not hard to do. Tapered handlebar. In the center here where the clamps are, this is 1 1/8 inch diameter bar, and then they sort of extrude it and I guess pull it down to a 7/8 here. I'm not really too clear on how exactly that gets manufactured, but really kind of a nice thing. It basically just allows you to have a stronger bar without a cross brace in the middle, and that's actually what I put on all my bikes. I don't really want to spend $170 to have somebody else install them for me. I think I'd rather get a $50 Tusk Chubb bar and put it on myself, but I guess to each their own. I think if I had to pick, I would definitely take the green. Let's see, what else do we have to pick here? Oh, vehicle protection. We could get a $50 handlebar pad. I think we'll pass. So there it is. Comes to $6,199. So if I was going to go with a 2024 KLR, I think I would just pick the regular. I think the S model would definitely be helpful for somebody that has a shorter stature than I do, or a shorter inseam even. Again, 31-inch inseam, 160 pounds and 5'10". To me, though, the fact that you're dropping the back of the bike, decreasing the ground clearance, it's just not worth it. I think if you're just starting out, or if you are a little bit closer to the ground than I am, the S model is a great option. But if you think that you can get away with riding the big one and have, previous experience on something smaller, or even just another KLR off-road, I think just the regular model is the way to go. As far as ABS goes, mine doesn't have it. I don't really feel like I need it just because the front brake just really isn't that strong to begin with. It would be kind of nice on the rear because I lock that up kind of a lot. But anyway here, we've got all sorts of different options on this thing now. We don't need any of that. So the old KLR would come out to $6,899. Boy. Man, if you're looking for wind protection, you don't mind something that's a little bit heavier and is going to be a little more solid on the pavement. The Gen 3 really is not a bad looking option. I mean, $700 more and you get all that wind protection and all that highway capability. Boy, this better be one heck of a dual sport. That's kind of a lot of money. I mean, it's not a 250, it's a 300, but for a little dual sport, $6,000 is kind of a lot. So if it was one of you guys that were sort of comparing these two bikes, I think the advice that I would give is if you're going to spend more time on the road, and if you're going to be more disappointed in having lackluster on-road performance than you would having lackluster off-road performance, then I think the KLR 650 is definitely the way to go if you're going to use it for commuting on the highway, if you're going to spend a lot of time out on the road when weather conditions aren't the greatest, possibly a little bit of rain, even just cold wind on you. It definitely is enough to make a motorcycle ride a lot less fun than it should or could be, and I think that's kind of what you're going to run into on a bike like this with absolutely no protection, where the KLR 650, I mean, even just the stock factory fairings and the windshield are really pretty darn good. It really does make riding in cold weather a lot better and a lot more comfortable, and you can do it a lot more. And why buy a motorcycle that you're going to be uncomfortable when you're riding? But I've got to say, I mean, I think it can kind of go the other way too. If you're somebody that's really looking to do more off-road riding and you just need to get to the trail, I mean, as long as you're not having to do 75 miles an hour, I mean, even without riding one of these things, I would have to think that this is going to be your better option. And I think it's easy to think that one of these bikes is really meant more for beginners, but I don't really think it is. I think they're trying to find sort of a sweet spot between beginner rider and somebody like me that can throw a KLR 650 around off-road almost no problem, but doesn't really want to if they don't have to. And that's why, man, these bikes just really do interest me. The TW200 definitely was not enough and is not something that I'd want to really use as my adventure bike long term. But for the type of riding and the type of adventures that I do, where I don't really ride more than an hour on the road, or at least not much more, I just don't need an interstate monster. I need something that I can have fun on when I'm completely loaded down with gear. And I mean, that's definitely something that I've noticed about both the 701 and the TW200 compared to the adventures that I took out on the KLR. I mean, it makes for a much less nervous experience and nervous ride, and you just have a lot more fun, which why go out and ride a motorcycle or go camping if you're not going to have fun, right? So I think this definitely is a very, very good option for me, and something that I think I might go with. But there are still some other bikes that I want to look at. If you guys have any other suggestions of bikes that you think that I should be looking at or that you'd like to see compared to the KLR 650, I would definitely be interested in that. You guys have given me some great options already that I do plan on looking at and making videos on. So thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Stay safe. Stay swanky. Get out. Enjoy this beautiful world any chance you get. And if you can't do that right now, here's some more videos to check out in the meantime. So I should answer that email back. I would have very much like it to buy your motorcycle. Hello.
Sorry, what?
I'm making a video.